Thanks everyone for joining me here today. On September 11, 2013, amid concerns that I had as the previous education critic for the Ontario Progressive Conservative Caucus, I raised with the auditor in the Standing Committee on Public Accounts the issue of the Bill 115 legislated contracts of September 2012 and then the reopened and renegotiated contracts of the spring of 2013. With that, I had been concerned early on that there would be costs totaling close to $500 million. I asked a number of questions in the legislature. I spoke at many press conferences, very concerned that the number would be $500 million in additional costs. And today, confirmed by the Auditor General, indeed, when Kathleen Wynne assumed office as Premier of Ontario and Liberal leader, that an extra $468 million was allocated to benefits, salaries, wages, and that I view as something that's taken directly out of the classroom. It's not lost on me that yesterday the provincial NDP education critic said that the government would have to take $500 million out of the education system, when today we find out that their savings was a shortfall of $468 million as a result of those renegotiated contracts. And I simply say, in simple addition, the ministry's projected net costs would be the revisions to the collective agreements before the Putting Students First Act was repealed at $200 million. The cost of revisions to collective agreements after the Putting Students First Act was repealed was $155 million, and then the estimated annual cost to eliminate the salary differential between ETFO and non-ETFO teachers at $113 million, and that of course would be the Me Too clauses that I have often talked about in this Assembly. So again, I'm happy to take any of your questions, but I must say, usually when you are validated or vindicated, you feel pretty good, and today, unfortunately, when I see $500 million being taken away from kids in our classroom, I don't feel that way. So happy to take any of your questions.
How do you characterize the Liberals' approach to this? Did they lie? Was it disingenuous when they were pressed repeatedly to say, okay, what did you give them? What did you give them to get them to settle down?
Well, it's been a long old haul. This started in 2012, and we're now in 2014. So over the past 2 years, we've heard from former Premier Dalton McGuinty and now Premier Kathleen Wynne that there were no additional compensation made to teachers' unions that would have cost the ministry envelope. Today, we know it did. We know it was almost $500 million, and that has confirmed what I've known all along from education sources across Ontario, who were very concerned that once these contracts were renegotiated and opened up, it would have a significant impact on school boards right across the province, meaning it will have a significant impact on students and our classrooms.
How would you characterize what they did? That was my question. Did they lie? Were they misleading us?
Well, it's clear that they weren't being transparent. It is clear that the Liberals didn't want to tell the whole truth, particularly before an election. I think if mothers and fathers knew about this in June, they would have made a different decision based on this new information.
Do you think they used the $468 million to basically buy labor peace with teachers and buy an election?
Well, I think that there was no question that Kathleen Wynne wanted to consolidate a voting bloc of hers before an election, and I think that there's no question that previous Liberal leader and Dalton McGuinty and his former education minister alienated that voting bloc. And it's very clear that now, 2 years later, after first a legislated agreement and then a reopened agreement which has seen a great deal more compensation, has impacted that coalition, and they were hand in glove during the last election as well. So only Kathleen Wynne can confirm or deny that, but certainly speculation is out there, and unfortunately today we find out that $500 million that could have been intended for kids in our classroom was used to pacify Kathleen Wynne.
So was this the Liberals buying the election basically by spending $500 million on these people that then would subsequently go out and attack the Conservative Party? Did they buy the election essentially with this money?
You know what? The voters spoke. I think that this information would have been better off having been in the hands of mums and dads before the election, and it wasn't. But now I think today, as kids are in school, parents are learning that $500 million that should have been intended for kids in classrooms went to renegotiate contracts so that Kathleen Wynne would be more popular.
At least, I mean, the teachers would say, well, first they took close to $2.5 billion, so the taxpayers are allegedly according to the auditor's report, $2 billion to the good. So in the grand scheme of things, given that the Liberals went after the sick days, are we not better off?
I'll answer that this way. In August of 2013 or 2012, I supported Bill 115 because it was a partial legislated wage freeze. The government then decided that they were going to rip that legislation up, and instead of saving $2.5 billion toward what was then, I think, a $12.9 billion deficit, they effectively gave up on savings of an extra half a billion dollars. When we're dealing with $500 million and we have a $10 billion deficit in the province of Ontario, this concerns me, and I think it concerns every parent across the province. What I'm suggesting today is that the government wasn't honest, and it wasn't truthful, and it was never transparent about the numbers that they were really going to give to these reopened contracts. And for a great deal of time, I had spent questioning the minister. I've never received an adequate response, and then here today, we finally get that from the Auditor General. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.